Let's continue our work with breakthrough breathing. If you remember from the first video, we talked about diaphragmatic breathing. So we're filling up here, releasing breath with speech. Now for many of you, you may say, I've taken yoga, I've taken Pilates, I've been a swimmer, I've been a runner. Many different sports require breathing. The challenge is you're not speaking while you're breathing. So singing actually comes the closest to the type of breathing that we're talking about. The challenge is that singers actually have to have more breath than you do as a speaker in many cases, especially one-on-one in a conversation. And you don't need to overdo it. You just want to sound natural. In public speaking, you may want more breath, especially if you're attempting to give a speech to executives, for example, and you want it to sound nice and smooth, or you have a large audience and no microphone. Then you may need to project your voice more, which we'll talk about as well. So let's begin where we left off with the sentence, establish a strong rapport. So remember, we're monitoring breath with our hand. You should feel air. Now some of you may say, I don't feel any air. So let's use a technique I've shown you in the past called the tissue technique. What we do here is we simply use a tissue. But what you do is make sure that when you're using the tissue, you separate it into two parts. And then, with a very thin tissue, let's monitor the breath. Breath. When you say a TH, as we talked about in the earlier video, you should be getting breath out of your mouth. If you're not, like this, breath, breath, notice it sounds different. So this should move with the tongue movement at the teeth. And remember, the tongue's not dipping, like this. Breath. And the tissue should move, more for some than others, but the idea is to move it a lot so that when you're talking naturally, you won't have to think about it. If you move it a tiny bit, you may not be using any breath at all when you're speaking naturally. So the idea is to breathe generously into the tissue, like this. Breath. Breathe from the diaphragm. Breath. Filling up with air and then exhaling, almost as if someone sticks a pin in you and out comes all the air. Breath. Let's try it with the tissue. Breath. Now try the sentence we did earlier. Establish a rapport. Different sounds work differently depending on your first language. Some of you may have lots of s with air, or lots of sh with air, or lots of with air. Start with the sound that is easiest for you to make. Always a breath sound, that is a voiceless sound, no buzz on your throat. And then elongate the breath and notice that it should move with the tissue. Breath. Establish a rapport, and rapport has only a tiny bit on the P. P is a plosive sound, so it's more like a punch. A rapport. The tissue gives you immediate feedback on breath. And this series of videos is all about breakthrough breathing. That is using breath when you release speech. Extremely important. Let's do some more examples with voiceless sounds. The second one has the TH and also the sh and the z, which has a bit of a buzz. But we'll focus on the voiceless sounds first. Start with that TH sound. Think. Now really elongate the sound using the band to monitor your length. Think about your options. Think about your options. Notice how long my sh is. So you want to avoid this. Think about your options. Notice how fast that is. Instead, elongate that TH. Think. Use breath. Think about your options. Now it starts to sound like you're singing. Right before you burst into song, like options, you stop the breath. Options. But remember, your palate must be moving forward. The palate's on the top of the mouth. If your palate's moving backward, and I'll do that, think about your options. No breath comes out. Watch. Think about your options. Now we're going to move the palate forward. Think about your options. And you as the listener know, did it sound better the first way or the second way? Let's try it again. Think about your options. Think about your options. Which one was easier to understand? The first one had no breath. The second one had lots of breath. Hopefully you can see how important it is to add breath to your speech. Let's keep doing it because each individual will have different sounds that are challenging, and you'll want to put those sounds in different environments, that is, surrounding other words, and put the techniques you've been learning with me in other videos together. So you no longer simply have individual words, you now have patterns, and we're looking at your native patterns to modify them to improve your American English. Let's try a third sentence. Facilitate growth. That's a very short item, not even really a true sentence. What I call this is a common collocation. All that means, it's a fancy word for putting similar terms together that you'll use again. If you practice sounds or words in isolation, you're likely to be able to pronounce them slowly, facilitate growth. But when you're speaking quickly, your old patterns will come back. Facilitate growth. Let's work on putting those common collocations together so that when you say something like facilitate growth, you actually have some length. And when you use that term, facilitate growth, which could come up, that's a thing people say in conversation, you've now practiced it and it's more likely for your brain to retrieve it and say it correctly. Facilitate growth. Now the F also has a lot of breath. Notice there's no voice on the F. In most languages, not every language, the F is easier to pronounce than the V. The V has a buzz. So let's start with the F. Facilitate growth. Once you have the F, we can begin to work on the V. But before we do, let's do one more voiceless pair. And actually we'll have a the in there. So 2 words with a the. Sensitize the sensation. That gives us lots of s, which can be very challenging for Chinese speakers and others as well. With the tissue, let's monitor the breath. Now for Chinese speakers, first grab a mirror. And for this one, I'm going to use a small mirror. So watch your mouth and notice your teeth. Are your upper and lower teeth touching when you say s? They should not be. If they're touching, notice what happens. I get very little air. It almost sounds like a T and an S. And instead of a T and an S, I just want an S. S. Back to that snake, hissing. S. Tongue can go behind your lower teeth, or it can float around behind your front teeth. But your tongue shouldn't go back or towards your palate. If it does, you'll get a sh sound instead of a s sound. And we want s. Sensitize the sensation. Monitor the space between your upper and your lower teeth and make sure that you have enough space that you can get breath through, like this. Sensitize the sensation. Now notice the shun. When you change from sen, say, to shun, your mouth movement changes. Notice how it changes. The lips tend to be more out. Sensei. The sha tends to be more forward. Exaggerate those positions. Sh, sensation. Now, with breath, exaggerate the length. Sensation. And get the stressed syllable long. Sensation. Sensitize the sensation. Keep the S's long, not short. This is a short S. Sensitize sensation. Way too short. Sensitize the sensation. It will feel as though you're exaggerating, and it should. So in sensitize the sensation, your listener may need more time to hear those sounds, especially if unfamiliar with your accent. So make sure that you exaggerate long enough for the listener. In the listener's perception, not your own perception. This is really key, and this is why you want to record yourself so you can hear the length of the sounds. Sensitize the sensation. In the next video, we'll deal with distinguishing sounds like f from v with breath. Again, this is all about breakthrough breathing, not just how to pronounce the sounds, but how to make them sound native-like for an American speaker. And this is so important, whether you want an American accent or you want an American audience to understand you the first time. Regardless of which, or perhaps it's both, of those intentions that you have, you will need to elongate the sounds with the breath.